Jalen. Jalen, is that your girlfriend? The cameras flashed so fast. They almost looked like lightning. Renee Lawson froze. 1 second, she had just been trying to leave the restaurant quietly, head down, hand clutching her purse, praying nobody recognized her. The next, microphones were in her face, phones recording, people shouting. How old is she? Isn't that woman almost 40? Jalen, are the rumors true? Did you leave the model for her? Renee's chest tightened. Oh God. No. This was exactly what she had warned him about. Her fingers instinctively slipped from Jalen Ryder's hand, panic rising so quickly she could barely breathe. She could already imagine the headlines waiting for her by morning. Old woman steals NBA star. Desperate divorcee dating 24-year-old athlete. Midlife crisis romance. Humiliation. Again. Just like when her husband left her for a younger woman, and half the internet acted like she should have seen it coming. Renee turned quickly, trying to escape the cameras before they captured the tears burning behind her eyes. But Jalen caught her wrist. Firm, gentle, protective, and before she could pull away, the 24-year-old NBA superstar stepped directly in front of her, like he was shielding her from the entire world. Then he looked straight into the cameras and said calmly, "She's the best thing that's ever happened to me." The reporters went silent. Renee's breath caught. Oh, God. Because the way he said it, he meant it. And somehow, that terrified her even more. Welcome back to Miss Wink Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. Tonight's story is about heartbreak, healing, forbidden love, and what happens when a woman who thought her best years were behind her suddenly becomes the center of a younger man's entire world. But before we begin, if stories filled with passion, emotion, betrayal, and unforgettable romance are your thing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. Because this story, it only gets more intense from here. 3 years earlier, Renee Lawson used to believe heartbreak looked dramatic. Screaming, crying, doors slamming. But real heartbreak looked like sitting across from your husband at a 12-seat marble dining table while he scrolled through his phone instead of looking at you. It looked like silence, cold silence. The kind that slowly made a woman question whether she was still visible at all. "You're overcooking the salmon again." Derek Lawson didn't even glance up when he said it. 44 years old. Perfect suit. Perfect haircut. Perfect public image. The successful corporate executive everyone admired. Renee stared at him from across the dining room, exhaustion quietly settling into her chest. "You haven't even tasted it yet," she said softly. "I don't need to." His thumb kept moving against his phone screen. Tap, scroll, tap. Like whatever was happening there mattered more than the woman sitting right in front of him. The woman who had spent 17 years loving him. 17. Renee looked down slowly at her plate, suddenly no longer hungry. The massive Beverly Hills mansion felt too quiet these days. Too polished. Too empty. Even their daughter, Gala, noticed it. Mama. Renee looked up as her 16-year-old daughter entered the dining room, wearing oversized pajamas from college orientation week, curly hair piled messily on top of her head. Gala stopped immediately. Her eyes moved between her parents. The tension was impossible to miss. You guys okay? Derek finally looked up then, forcing a smile so practiced it almost looked rehearsed. Of course, Gala didn't believe him. Neither did Renee. But that had become normal too. Pretending things weren't changing. Pretending Derek didn't come home later every night. Pretending he still touched her, looked at her, wanted her. Pretending she hadn't caught him smiling at his phone countless times these past few months. A smile he hadn't given her in years. Mama. Kayla's voice softened carefully. You okay? Renee quickly smiled. Too quickly. I'm fine, baby. That was the thing about women like Renee Lawson. They learned how to suffer beautifully, quietly, elegantly, without making anybody uncomfortable. And maybe that was her first mistake, because slowly, almost without noticing, she had started disappearing inside her own marriage. Not physically, emotionally. A woman could survive a lot of things. Stress, motherhood, aging, sacrifice. But there was something deeply painful about realizing the man who once couldn't stop touching you now barely looked at you at all. And the worst part, Renee still blamed herself. Maybe she worked too much. Maybe she stopped dressing up enough. Maybe she became boring. Maybe younger women were simply easier to love. That thought haunted her more than she wanted to admit, especially lately. Especially after she noticed Derek suddenly caring about the gym again. Expensive cologne, whitening his teeth, hiding his phone screen, the signs were there. She just wasn't ready to face them yet. That night, long after Derek disappeared into his office upstairs, Renee stood alone in the kitchen rinsing dishes beneath soft golden lights. The housekeeper had already gone home. The mansion was silent. Her wedding ring caught the light as warm water rushed over her fingers. 17 years. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Then, suddenly, a vibration buzzed against the marble counter behind her. Renee frowned slightly and turned off the faucet. Derek's phone. He must have forgotten it downstairs. That alone was unusual. Lately, he carried that thing everywhere. Bathroom, gym, even to bed. Another vibration. The screen lit briefly against the dark kitchen. Renee wasn't trying to look. Really, she wasn't. But the message preview appeared before the screen dimmed again. A heart emoji. Then, miss you already. Renee froze. The air left her lungs slowly, because that message definitely wasn't from her. And for the first time in years, the woman who always kept everything together felt something crack quietly inside her chest. Renee didn't confront Derek that night. She wanted to. God. She wanted to. But after 17 years of marriage, instinct had taught her something dangerous. Men became honest long before they confessed. You just had to pay attention. So instead of screaming, instead of throwing the phone, instead of waking the entire house in tears, Renee quietly placed it back, exactly where she found it. Then she went upstairs alone, and sometime around 2 in the morning, she heard Derek finally come to bed. He smelled unfamiliar. Not lipstick, not perfume. Something worse. Effort. The kind of effort people only made when they still wanted to impress someone. Renee kept her eyes closed as the mattress dipped beside her. Derek didn't touch her, didn't kiss her shoulder, didn't whisper good night. Just silence again. But this time, the silence felt guilty, and somehow that hurt even more. The next few weeks became unbearable after that, because once a woman noticed something was wrong, she started noticing everything: the sudden business trips, the gym membership, the careful positioning of his phone, the way he smiled while texting, the emotional distance. It was like discovering cracks in glass you once believed was unbreakable. And the worst part? Derek looked happier lately. Not with her, just in general. That realization hollowed Renee out slowly. One afternoon, while preparing lunch in the kitchen, Renee heard laughter echo faintly from Derek's home office upstairs. Deep laughter, relaxed laughter, the kind she hadn't heard from him in years. Her chopping slowed slightly. Then she heard it. A woman's voice, soft through the partially closed office door upstairs, faint enough to sound like it was coming through speakerphone. Young, playful. Renee stood still for a moment. Maybe it was business. Maybe she was overthinking. Then Derek laughed again. Not his polite corporate laugh. His real one. Warm, effortless, intimate. Something inside Renee tightened painfully, because he hadn't sounded that happy with her in a very long time. That evening, she finally asked, carefully, gently, "Are you seeing someone?" Derek looked up from loosening his tie. No shock, no outrage, no immediate denial. And honestly, that told her everything before he even opened his mouth. He exhaled slowly, like he was exhausted by the conversation already. Renee, her stomach twisted. That tone, that careful tone people used when they were about to destroy someone softly. Just tell me the truth. For a long moment, Derek said nothing. Then, finally, "I didn't mean for it to happen." Renee felt heat rush into her face instantly. Oh God. So this was real. Her fingers curled against the kitchen counter to steady herself. How long? A few months. A few months. A few months of sleeping beside her, touching her occasionally, eating her food, looking her in the eyes, while belonging emotionally to someone else. Renee swallowed hard. Who is she? Derek hesitated, and for some reason, that hesitation terrified her more than the affair itself. Then he answered quietly, "She's 23. The room went silent. Renee blinked once, twice. 23. For a second, she genuinely thought she misheard him. 23. That was closer to Kayla's age than his. A strange sound escaped Renee's throat before she could stop it. Not quite laughter, not quite pain. Just disbelief. Oh my God. Derek rubbed his forehead immediately, frustrated now. Can we not make this dramatic? Dramatic. Renee stared at him. This man had just shattered 17 years of marriage, and he was worried about drama. She makes me feel, Derek paused carefully, alive again. That sentence hit harder than the cheating itself, because suddenly Renee understood. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't temptation. This man had already rewritten their marriage in his mind long before confessing it aloud. And the cruelest part? He genuinely believed his happiness justified her pain. Renee looked at him for a very long time, then finally asked the question, quietly bleeding inside her chest. "Did I stop being enough for you?" For the first time that night, Derek looked uncomfortable, and that silence answered everything. The divorce became official 4 months later, not explosive, not dramatic, just cold, clinical, like dismantling a life, piece by piece, while pretending not to bleed from it. Renee hated that part most. How normal everything looked, while her entire world quietly collapsed. The lawyers handled the paperwork. The assistants scheduled meetings. The accountants divided assets. And Derek? Derek moved through the process like a man already halfway into his next life. Maybe because he was. Renee tried to stay graceful through all of it. For Kayla. Always for Kayla. Even when she overheard whispers at charity events. Even when women looked at her with that awful mixture of pity and curiosity. Poor Renee. 17 years, and he still left her. The humiliation spread quickly once people learned who Derek was dating. A fitness influencer named Brielle Monroe, 23 years old. Perfect body, millions of followers, constantly smiling online, like life had never touched her cruelly before. Renee made the mistake of looking at her Instagram once. Only once. That was enough. Young skin, tiny waist, luxury, vacations, carefree laughter. Everything Renee no longer felt. And God, the comments were worse. She upgraded. Older wives always get replaced. This is why men don't marry older women. Men want youth. Renee stopped sleeping properly after that, because no matter how confident a woman tried to be, certain words still found ways to crawl beneath her skin, especially when they echoed fears she already carried privately. One night, Kayla found her sitting alone on the patio wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly into the darkness beyond the pool lights. "Mama." Renee looked up quickly, forcing composure again. But Kayla saw through it immediately. "You've barely eaten all day." "I'm okay." "You keep saying that." Renee looked away quietly. The soft California wind brushed against her curls. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kayla finally sat beside her. "You know what makes me angry?" Her daughter muttered softly. "Dad, acting like he suddenly found happiness after destroying ours." Renee's throat tightened unexpectedly. Kayla rarely spoke badly about Derek. Even now. Especially now. "He didn't destroy ours," Renee whispered automatically. Kayla gave her a look. "Mama." There it was again. That instinct. Renee had to protect everyone else before herself. Even the man who broke her heart. Kayla reached for her hand gently. "You know this isn't because you weren't enough, right?" Renee smiled faintly, but her eyes burned instantly, because deep down, part of her still wondered, and that question haunted her constantly now. Was she too old, too boring, too comfortable, too forgettable? It was terrifying how quickly betrayal could make a woman rewrite her entire identity. The next morning, Renee forced herself back into routine. That was the only way she knew how to survive. Movement, structure, responsibility. She accepted more private chef bookings, more elite events, more luxury clients. Work distracted her from thinking too much. And that was how she eventually received the offer that would unknowingly change her entire life. Professional live-in chef needed for MBA client, the agency woman explained over the phone. Temporary contract. 3 months, initially. Renee nearly declined immediately. No athletes. The woman laughed softly. Bad experience? No. Renee answered honestly, I'm just too old for chaos. If only she knew. The agency representative continued quickly. He specifically requested someone mature. Said he's tired of party chefs and social media people filming everything. Renee frowned slightly. That was unusual. Most celebrity clients wanted excitement around them, not privacy. What team does he play for? The Los Angeles Blaze. Renee recognized the name instantly. The hottest rookie franchise in the NBA right now, which meant money, fame, media, attention. Women. Absolutely not. But then the woman mentioned the salary. Renee closed her eyes briefly. Kayla's tuition. Mortgage adjustments after the divorce. Starting over financially at 39. Pride became expensive after heartbreak. When would I start? Renee asked quietly. And somewhere across Los Angeles, without realizing it yet, Jalen Ryder's life was about to change too. By the time Renee Lawson finally arrived at the luxury penthouse overlooking downtown Los Angeles, she had already regretted accepting the job twice, maybe 3 times. The building alone screamed money. Floor-to-ceiling glass, private elevators, security downstairs, valets moving luxury cars like they belonged in museums. This wasn't normal wealth. This was celebrity wealth. Renee adjusted the sleeve of her cream blouse slightly as the elevator climbed higher and higher above the city. 39 years old, divorced, starting over, working private chef contracts for famous athletes she barely cared about. Life really could change fast. The elevator doors finally opened directly into the penthouse, and Renee stopped for a second. God, the place was enormous. Modern black marble, soft amber lighting, massive windows overlooking the city skyline. Beautiful, but strangely cold, like nobody truly lived there emotionally. A young assistant hurried toward her quickly. You must be Ms. Lawson. Renee is fine. The assistant smiled politely before lowering her voice. Just warning you now. He can be difficult. Renee sighed internally. Of course he could. Rich, young, famous. That combination usually came with ego problems. He doesn't like staff hovering, the assistant continued. But he also gets annoyed when things aren't exactly how he wants. Wonderful. Renee set her bag down calmly. I'll survive. The assistant looked visibly relieved. Good luck. Then she left. Just like that. Alone. Renee exhaled slowly and walked farther into the penthouse kitchen. And honestly, the kitchen was bigger than her first apartment. Professional-grade appliances, imported marble counters, enough expensive cookware to feed a hotel. Yet somehow the refrigerator looked almost empty. Energy drinks, protein shakes, takeout containers. Renee frowned slightly. This man was eating like a college student with a shoe deal. No wonder they hired a chef. She had barely started unpacking ingredients when she heard it. Laughter, male voices, then footsteps approaching from somewhere deeper inside the penthouse. Renee straightened instinctively. A second later, 3 men entered the kitchen mid-conversation. Tall, athletic, expensive casual clothes, basketball players. One of them stopped immediately when he saw her, and suddenly the entire room shifted. Jalen Ryder. Renee recognized him instantly now. Even she knew his face. 24 years old. The NBA's newest obsession. Endless sports headlines. Luxury campaigns. Millions of followers. In person, worse. Much worse. Tall enough to make the kitchen suddenly feel smaller. Dark hoodie, pushed slightly up his forearms. Diamond chain catching soft kitchen light. Beautiful, in that careless way some men didn't even seem aware of. And those eyes landed on Renee and stayed there. Too long. One of his teammates smirked immediately. "Oh," he muttered under his breath. "Chef is fine." Renee ignored that completely. Professional. Always professional. But Jalen still hadn't looked away. Not even slightly. Something unreadable flickered across his face before he finally spoke. "You're the new chef." Deep voice. Calm. Smooth enough to instantly irritate her. Renee crossed her arms lightly. "Yes." Silence. Again, that stare. Honestly, it was almost rude. Then, unexpectedly, one corner of Jalen's mouth lifted slightly. "You look too elegant to be yelling at athletes about vegetables." His teammates burst out laughing. Renee blinked once. Ah, so he was charming. Dangerous combination. She answered dryly. "And you look too old to still be surviving on energy drinks." His friends laughed louder this time. Jalen stared at her for half a second longer, then smiled fully. And oh, that smile was trouble. Real trouble. Because it transformed him instantly from intimidating superstar into something warm, boyish, magnetic. Renee hated that she noticed. "You got jokes?" One teammate laughed. But Jalen barely acknowledged them anymore. His attention remained fixed on Renee like he'd suddenly forgotten everyone else existed. And for some strange reason, that made her nervous. Chapter 2. The Man Who Wouldn't Stop Looking. Part 1. Why are you always here? Renee quickly realized something strange about Jalen Ryder. The man was always in the kitchen. At first, she assumed it was coincidence. Athletes ate constantly. That wasn't unusual. But after the 5th day in a row of him, somehow appearing every single time she cooked, she started noticing patterns. And Renee Lawson had become very good at noticing patterns after her divorce. Early mornings before practice, late nights after games, random afternoons between meetings. Somehow, Jalen always ended up leaning against the kitchen counter watching her cook. Not speaking much, just there. It should have felt uncomfortable. Oddly, it didn't. Mostly because he never crossed boundaries, never touched her, never made inappropriate comments, never acted like the entitled athletes she'd worked around briefly before. Instead, he just observed things, quiet things. You hum when you're concentrating. Renee glanced up briefly from seasoning chicken. What? Jalen sat at the island, scrolling through something on his phone. You hum under your breath while cooking? Renee frowned slightly. I do not. One corner of his mouth lifted faintly. You're doing it right now. Her lips pressed together instantly. Oh, that was mildly embarrassing. She turned back toward the stove quickly. Well, stop listening. A quiet chuckle came from behind her. Not loud, not mocking, warm. And for some reason, that sound lingered in the kitchen longer than it should have. A few minutes later, Renee placed a plate in front of him. Grilled sea bass, roasted vegetables, fresh herbs. Jalen looked down at it briefly, then back at her. You know nobody's cooked for me like this before, right? Renee continued wiping the counter casually. You're an NBA player. I highly doubt that. No, he said calmly. People cook because I'm famous. His eyes dropped briefly to the food again. You cook like you actually care whether I eat. Something about the way he said it made Renee pause slightly. Not because it sounded romantic. It didn't. It sounded lonely. And somehow, that felt more dangerous. She busied herself with organizing ingredients instead. Professional distance. Always. But Jalen kept talking quietly from the island stool. You got family here in LA. My daughter's here for college. How old is she again? 19. You miss having her at home. The question caught Renee off guard slightly. Most people didn't ask follow-up questions anymore, especially rich men. She answered honestly, before thinking too much about it. Sometimes. Jalen nodded slowly, like he understood the feeling. Then silence settled again. Not awkward silence. Just quiet. Comfortable quiet. Which honestly felt strange, considering they barely knew each other. Renee reached for a bowl from the top shelf. Before she could grab it properly, another hand reached up beside hers effortlessly. Tall, of course. Jalen handed her the bowl without speaking. But for one brief second, they stood closer than they had before. Renee suddenly became aware of the warmth coming off his skin, the clean scent of soap lingering after practice. How absurdly tall he was up close. She stepped back almost immediately. Thank you. Jalen watched her carefully for a moment. Not intense, not possessive, just curious, like he was trying to figure something out about her. That same look appeared more and more lately, and Renee honestly didn't know what to do with it. Later that evening, one of Jalen's teammates wandered into the kitchen searching for water. Marcus Cole, loud, funny, entirely too observant. His eyes moved between Renee cooking and Jalen sitting nearby reviewing game footage at the counter. Then Marcus smirked slightly. You know, he said casually, while opening the refrigerator, I've never seen this man sit still in a kitchen this long before. Renee barely looked up. He's eating. Nah. Marcus laughed softly. He usually grabs food and disappears. Jalen finally glanced up. Marcus What? Marcus shrugged innocently. I'm just saying. Brother suddenly acts like home training camp happens next to the stove. Renee shook her head lightly, amused despite herself. You all are dramatic. Marcus grinned before leaving the kitchen, but not before muttering, Man's curious. That's all I'm saying. Curious. The word stayed in Renee's mind longer than it should have, because maybe that was the unsettling part. Jalen Ryder didn't look at her like a woman men chased. He looked at her like a question he couldn't stop trying to answer. And somehow, that felt far more dangerous. Over the next few weeks, Renee became part of the rhythm of the penthouse. Quietly, almost invisibly. Morning smoothies before practice. Carefully planned meals. Late-night recovery, snacks after games. Routine. And honestly, Renee preferred it that way. Routine felt safe, predictable, especially after spending years rebuilding herself from a divorce that had nearly destroyed her confidence. The last thing she needed was complication, which was exactly why Jalen Ryder, becoming increasingly interested in her opinions, was starting to feel dangerous. You changed the sauce. Renee barely glanced up from the stove. Yes. Jalen leaned against the kitchen island, watching her work again. It tastes better, you said. The other one was perfect yesterday. It was... Renee sighed softly. Then why are we discussing sauce like it's breaking news? That earned a laugh from him. Not loud, just genuine. God. He laughed so easily around her now, and that was becoming a problem. Not because she thought he liked her. Renee refused to let her mind go there, but because somewhere along the way, Jalen had started treating the kitchen like it belonged to both of them, like this was his favorite place in the penthouse, which made no sense considering he owned a private theater, rooftop pool, gaming room, full luxury lounge. Yet, somehow, he kept ending up beside her while she cooked. You ever take a day off? He asked. Suddenly, Renee scoffed lightly. From cooking, from taking care of everybody. The question caught her slightly off guard. She kept slicing vegetables carefully. That's what adults do. Jalen studied her quietly. You always answer questions like that. Like what? Like you're trying not to actually answer. Renee looked up then, and there it was again. That look. Not flirtation, not arrogance. Attention. Real attention. The kind that made people feel seen in ways they weren't prepared for. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Luckily, her phone vibrated before she had to respond. Gala. Renee answered immediately. Hi, baby. Jalen looked away respectfully as Renee listened to her daughter complain dramatically about a professor. A smile slowly spread across Renee's face. You're exaggerating. I am not, Gala groaned through the speaker. This man hates joy. Renee laughed softly, and for a brief moment, she forgot Jalen was watching her, until Gala suddenly asked, Wait, are you still at Basketball Boy's house? Renee nearly choked. Gala, what? You literally work for a famous athlete. Jalen looked up immediately at the sound of Renee's startled voice. His expression instantly amused. Renee turned away slightly. Yes, and unlike you, some of us have professionalism. Gala teased. Tell your basketball player I said hi. Good night, Gala. Renee hung up quickly before her daughter embarrassed her further. Silence. Then, basketball boy. Renee closed her eyes briefly. You heard none of that. Jalen leaned back against the counter slowly. Your daughter doesn't know my name. She does. She just enjoys irritating me. That makes two of us. Renee looked at him flatly. You're very comfortable for someone who still leaves protein shakes, sitting around like a college freshman. That sounded personal. It was. Jalen laughed again. And this time, Renee caught herself noticing something she hadn't before. He looked lighter around her lately, less guarded, less polished. Like the version of him the world constantly consumed wasn't the same man standing here in oversized sweatpants asking unnecessary questions while she cooked dinner. Dangerous thought. Very dangerous thought. So dangerous that Renee immediately shut it down internally. This was temporary. That was important to remember. Athletes changed staff constantly. People moved on. Life moved on. And younger men especially. They got curious about things all the time. That didn't mean anything, which was why, later that same evening, Renee was completely unprepared for what happened next. She had just finished cleaning the kitchen when Jalen walked in fresh from the shower, damp curls, slightly messy, black t-shirt, hanging low against his chest. Renee grabbed her bag immediately. Perfect timing. She was leaving. Good night, she said calmly. But as she walked past him, Jalen spoke quietly behind her. You always leave the second I walk in. Renee paused, only slightly, then turned carefully. What? His expression remained relaxed, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. I noticed you disappear every time we're alone too long. Renee stared at him for a second, because, unfortunately, he wasn't wrong, and that realization alone made her pulse feel suddenly unsteady. So she answered the safest way possible. You ask too many questions, Jalen. Then she walked away before he could notice she suddenly needed air. The problem with Jalen Ryder wasn't that he was charming. Renee had met charming men before. The real problem? He paid attention. And attention was dangerous when you'd spent years feeling emotionally invisible. By the second month working at the penthouse, Renee had learned the details nobody online ever talked about. Jalen hated silence after bad games. He played old jazz music when stressed. Couldn't sleep without background noise. Pretended not to care about criticism, even though he secretly read comments at 2 a.m. And for some reason, he only seemed honest late at night. That was when the celebrity version of him disappeared. No cameras, no interviews, no teammates, no performance, just Jalen. One rainy Thursday night, Renee was cleaning the kitchen long after midnight when she noticed movement near the balcony. Jalen sat outside alone beneath the covered terrace area overlooking the city. Phone face down beside him. Untouched drink melting slowly against the table. Game footage replaying silently on the outdoor television. Lost night. Oh, that explained the mood. Renee hesitated briefly, then returned to wiping the counter. Not her business. A few seconds later, the sliding balcony door opened. Jalen walked back inside quietly. He looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. You're still awake? He asked. So are you? Can't sleep? Renee nodded once. That answer felt familiar, somehow. She turned toward the refrigerator. You eat after losses. Usually not. Well, she said calmly, while pulling ingredients onto the counter. That's stupid. Jalen blinked once, then laughed softly under his breath. There she is again. Renee ignored that completely. 10 minutes later, she placed a warm plate of food in front of him at the kitchen island. Nothing extravagant, just comfort food. Simple, balanced, quietly comforting. Jalen looked down at it for a moment before speaking. You know what's crazy? What? You always know what people need without them saying it. Renee busied herself rinsing dishes. That comes with age. The second the words left her mouth, she regretted them slightly, because suddenly the air shifted. Jalen leaned back slowly in the stool. You do that on purpose. Renee frowned lightly. Do what? Keep bringing up your age, like it's some kind of warning label. Renee stared at the sink for a moment. Water rushing softly between them. Then she answered carefully. It's reality. No, Jalen said quietly. It's insecurity. That one landed harder than she expected. Renee turned around immediately. You don't know anything about me. Jalen held her gaze calmly. I know somebody made you think getting older means getting less valuable. Silence. Complete silence. Because, unfortunately, he wasn't entirely wrong, and Renee hated how quickly the truth reached beneath her defenses. She crossed her arms lightly. You analyze everybody this much? Only people who interest me. There it was again. That wordless tension building slowly between them. Not obvious, not inappropriate, just charged. Like something neither of them had fully named yet. Renee looked away first. Professional. Stay professional. But Jalen's voice softened before she could escape the conversation completely. You know what I think? What? I think you spent so much time taking care of everybody else that nobody notices when you're tired. Renee's chest tightened unexpectedly, because no one had said something that observant to her in years. Not Derek, not friends, not even herself. For a second, she forgot how to respond, and somehow that scared her more than attraction ever could. Before we continue, I want you to answer this honestly in the comments. If a younger man truly loved an older woman openly and seriously, would you support the relationship? Or would the age gap always bother you no matter how real the connection felt? Because Renee keeps telling herself, this is just harmless curiosity. But Jalen Ryder is starting to look at her like a man slowly forgetting every rule he used to live by. And trust me, that's where things get dangerous. Jalen Ryder was only beginning to realize how deeply Renee Lawson was about to change him. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Renee told herself the distance was necessary, healthy even. After that late-night conversation in the kitchen, she became more careful around Jalen, more composed, more aware. She stopped lingering in conversations, stopped laughing too easily around him, stopped sitting at the kitchen island while he ate. Professional. That word had become her shield lately, because something about Jalen Ryder was beginning to feel emotionally unsafe. Not because he crossed boundaries. Oddly, he never did. The danger came from how easily he noticed things, and Renee was starting to realize she liked being noticed by him far more than she should. So she created distance. Unfortunately, Jalen noticed that, too. "You're avoiding me." Renee barely looked up from arranging fruit on a serving tray. "I'm working." "You were working before, and I'm working now." Jalen leaned casually against the counter watching her. The early morning sunlight pouring through the penthouse windows softened everything around him. Messy curls, gray hoodie, sleep-heavy voice. Too comfortable. That was the problem. He felt too comfortable around her now. And somehow, he'd started making her feel comfortable too. Dangerous combination. Renee adjusted the tray carefully. "You have practice in 40 minutes. And you changed the subject." She sighed quietly. "Jalen, what happened?" The question interrupted her softly. No accusation, no ego, just genuine confusion. And somehow, that made this harder. Renee finally looked at him properly, because the truth was, she didn't actually know what had changed. Nothing obvious. No dramatic moment. Just tiny things slowly accumulating. Noticing his footsteps instinctively, expecting his voice in the kitchen, wondering if he'd eaten after games, missing his presence when the penthouse felt quiet. No, absolutely not. She was entirely too grown for this. "I just think boundaries are important," she answered carefully. Something flickered across Jalen's face then. Not anger, disappointment. Small, quick, but there. "Boundaries," he repeated quietly. Renee hated that she suddenly felt guilty. Ridiculous. This was exactly why distance mattered. But instead of arguing, Jalen simply nodded once. Okay, that was it. No teasing, no questions, no lingering conversation. He grabbed a bottle of water and walked out toward practice. And somehow that felt worse. The penthouse became strangely quiet after he left. Renee continued cleaning in silence, annoyed with herself for even noticing. This was good, necessary, normal. So why did the kitchen suddenly feel emptier? She shook the thought away immediately. By afternoon, the team's house manager arrived unexpectedly carrying schedules for upcoming travel arrangements. "Jalen's heading to Chicago after tomorrow's game," she explained. 5-day road trip. Renee nodded absent-mindedly while reviewing meal requests. 5 days. Her stomach tightened unexpectedly. Oh, that was ridiculous. Truly ridiculous. But the realization lingered anyway. 5 days without hearing. You changed the source. Or you always leave when I walk in. 5 days without his quiet, late-night presence drifting into the kitchen. Renee closed the folder firmly. This was exactly the problem. She had gotten too used to him. Too used to his voice, his attention, his curiosity. And maybe that shouldn't matter. But, unfortunately, it already did a little. That evening, Kayla called while Renee prepared dinner alone. "You sound weird," her daughter said immediately. "I sound tired." "No. You sound thoughtful." Renee rolled her eyes softly. "You're dramatic." "Mama," Kayla laughed, "I literally came from you. I know your moods." Renee smiled despite herself. Then Kayla asked casually, "So, How's basketball, boy? Renee nearly dropped the spoon in her hand. There is no basketball boy. He's my employer. Renee sighed. You are entirely too entertained by this. Kayla's grin was audible through the phone. I just think it's funny that you suddenly mentioned this man. Every conversation. Renee froze slightly. Wait, she did? Oh no. Before she could recover, the penthouse door opened somewhere behind her. Footsteps, voices. Jalen was home early, and somehow Renee felt her entire body recognize his presence before she even turned around. That realization terrified her. Renee ended the call with Kayla much faster than usual, mostly because she suddenly felt embarrassed for reasons she didn't fully understand, which made absolutely no sense. She was a grown woman, a 39-year-old woman with bills, responsibilities, and a failed marriage behind her. Not a teenager getting caught with a crush. The very thought irritated her immediately, till her pulse hadn't completely settled by the time Jalen entered the kitchen. You cook when you're stressed? Renee looked up sharply. Jalen dropped his duffel bag near the island before reaching into the refrigerator for water. How would you know that? You move faster? Simple answer. Too simple. Like he noticed her more often than he should. Renee turned back toward the stove. You're home early. Coach cancelled film review. His voice sounded tired again. Not physically, mentally. The season was getting more intense lately. More media, more pressure, more expectations. Renee plated the food quietly, while Jalen loosened the chain around his neck absently. Then he looked at the stove. You made gumbo? You said you missed Louisiana food. The words slipped out before she realized what she'd admitted. Jalen paused, then slowly looked at her, and suddenly Renee wished she could take the sentence back, because now it sounded personal, like she remembered things about him intentionally, which she unfortunately did. Jalen walked closer to the counter. Not too close. Never too close. But enough for Renee to notice the clean scent of soap mixed with sweat lingering after practice. You remembered that. Renee focused carefully on wiping the counter. You mentioned it once, 3 weeks ago. Ah, wonderful. Now she sounded emotionally observant. Exactly what she was trying not to become. Renee finally slid the bowl toward him. Eat before it gets cold. For a moment, Jalen didn't move, didn't touch the food, just looked at her quietly. Then, finally, you waited up. The question softened something unexpectedly inside Renee's chest. Not because it was romantic, because he sounded genuinely surprised by the idea that somebody would. And suddenly, she understood something she hadn't before. For all the fame, the money, the endless attention, Jalen Ryder spent a lot of time alone. That realization changed the atmosphere between them in a way Renee didn't entirely like. Because loneliness recognized loneliness, and that kind of connection could become dangerous fast. I was already awake, she answered carefully. Jalen held her gaze for another second before finally sitting down to eat. The kitchen fell quiet after that. Soft jazz played low through hidden speakers. Rain tapped gently against the penthouse windows. City lights glowed beyond the glass walls. Too intimate. The entire moment felt too intimate. Renee rinsed dishes mostly to keep herself occupied. But after a few bites, Jalen suddenly spoke again. "You know, everybody here acts weird around me." Renee glanced over briefly. "What does that mean?" "They either want something." He shrugged lightly. "Or they're trying too hard not to want something." That sentence lingered heavily between them. Renee dried her hand slowly. "And me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Jalen looked at her immediately. Directly. Too directly. And for one dangerous second. Renee felt suddenly aware of everything, and the fact that they were completely alone. Then Jalen answered softly, "You treat me normal." Her breath caught slightly, because somehow, out of everything he could have said, that felt the most intimate, not beautiful, not attractive, not desirable, normal. Like beneath all the fame and attention, he was simply a man exhausted by being consumed by the world. And somehow, Renee understood that feeling more than she wanted to. The next few days became strange, not dramatic, not obvious, just subtly different in ways Renee couldn't fully explain. She became more aware of Jalen's presence now, the sound of his footsteps, the low rumble of his voice from another room, the way the energy in the penthouse shifted whenever he came home. And unfortunately, Jalen seemed more aware of her too. "You're doing it again." Renee looked up from slicing strawberries. "Doing what?" "Thinking too hard." She stared at him flatly. "You can't possibly know that." Jalen sat at the kitchen island, in practice shorts, scrolling through his tablet. "You get this line right here." He pointed beneath his eye. "Every time you're overthinking." Renee blinked once, then immediately looked away, because that was an absurd thing to notice about somebody. You observe people too much. You hide things too much. That answer came too fast, too naturally, and somehow it stayed with Renee long after the conversation ended. By Friday night, the team had won their game against Seattle. The penthouse was louder than usual afterward. Music, teammates, laughter echoing through the massive space. Renee stayed mostly in the kitchen preparing late-night food while players wandered in and out grabbing plates. Normally she preferred staying invisible during gatherings like this, but tonight she kept catching people looking between her and Jalen strangely. Not suspicious, just noticing. Especially Marcus. That man noticed entirely too much. At one point, he leaned against the counter while stealing shrimp from a tray. "You know, Jalen, don't bring people around here often, right?" Renee frowned slightly. "There are literally 12 people in this penthouse." Marcus laughed. "You know what I mean." Before Renee could respond, another player yelled Marcus's name from the living room. He smirked lightly before walking away, but not before adding, "You make this place feel calmer." The comment unsettled Renee more than she expected, because lately it did feel calmer here, warmer, more lived in emotionally, and she wasn't sure when that started happening. An hour later, most of the guests finally left. The penthouse quieted gradually. Renee exhaled softly while gathering empty glasses from the counter. "You don't have to clean tonight." Her body reacted instantly to Jalen's voice behind her now. That realization alone annoyed her. I always clean. You always work. Renee glanced over her shoulder briefly. Jalen stood closer than usual tonight. Not inappropriate, just close enough for her to notice details: the damp curls after his shower, the faint scratch in his voice from yelling during the game, exhaustion hidden beneath his calm expression. And for one dangerous moment, Renee wondered what it would feel like to touch his face. Her stomach dropped immediately afterward. Absolutely not. No. That thought alone was crossing lines she had no business approaching. She grabbed another glass quickly. You should celebrate with your friends. I did. His voice stayed quiet. Now they're gone. The kitchen suddenly felt much smaller than before. Renee focused carefully on stacking dishes. Professional, professional, professional. Then, suddenly, the lights flickered once, and the entire penthouse went dark. Renee froze instantly. Oh my God! Before she could move, thunder cracked loudly outside. Then, without thinking, her hand grabbed the nearest thing beside her. Jalen. Silence. Complete darkness surrounded them, except for distant city lights filtering faintly through the windows. And then Renee realized something horrifying. Jalen's hand had immediately closed around hers too. Warm, large, steady. Neither of them moved. Neither let go. The rain outside suddenly sounded louder somehow. Closer. Renee became painfully aware of his hand resting lightly on her waist, and how near his body was in the darkness. The warmth radiating from him, her own heartbeat suddenly betraying her. Oh, this was bad. Very bad. Then emergency backup lights finally glowed softly throughout the penthouse. Dim amber light returned slowly, and suddenly they could see each other again. Jalen looked down at their hands briefly, then up at her. Neither of them spoke, but something had changed. Something small, subtle, dangerous, because for the first time since meeting him, Renee Lawson realized she wasn't just aware of Jalen Ryder anymore. She was starting to want him a little too. Renee barely slept that night, which was ridiculous, entirely ridiculous, because nothing actually happened. A power outage, a hand touch, that was all. Yet, somehow, her body reacted like the moment meant more than it should have, and that alone unsettled her deeply. The next morning, Renee woke up already annoyed with herself. By the time she arrived at the penthouse kitchen, she had fully decided on one thing: distance. Again. Necessary distance. She kept her focus entirely on breakfast preparation, while the sunrise slowly spilled gold across the massive windows. Egg whites, fruit, coffee, routine, safe things. The sound of footsteps entered the kitchen around 7:30. Renee didn't turn immediately. She already knew it was him. That realization bothered her too. Morning. His voice sounded rough from sleep. Warm. Renee kept slicing fruit. Morning. Silence settled briefly. Usually by now, Jalen would say something unnecessary. Observe something annoying. Ask questions. Today, nothing. That almost made her look up. Almost. Then, finally, you okay? Renee exhaled softly. There it was. Of course he noticed. I'm fine. She frowned slightly at his tone. What does that mean? It means you've chopped the same strawberry 4 times. Renee looked down instantly. Oh, wonderful. She placed the knife down with more force than necessary. I'm tired. Jalen leaned lightly against the counter, watching her carefully. And somehow, his attention felt different this morning too. Quieter, more aware. Like the moment during the blackout hadn't left him either. You left fast last night, he said softly. Renee grabbed a towel quickly. I had work early. That wasn't the reason. Her pulse shifted immediately. Dangerous conversation. Abort immediately. Renee turned toward the coffee machine instead. You're imagining things. I don't think I am. The calm certainty in his voice made her chest tighten unexpectedly. Then, before she could respond, his phone buzzed loudly against the counter. The atmosphere broke instantly. A woman's face flashed briefly across the screen. Beautiful, young, model, pretty. Renee looked away immediately. Of course. Right. Reality. Jalen glanced at the phone once, then declined the call without hesitation. But the damage was already done, because suddenly Renee remembered exactly who he was again. 24. Famous. Desired. Constantly. Women like that probably filled his phone endlessly. And her. She was a divorced 39-year-old private chef, trying very hard not to become emotionally stupid. The contrast hit her hard enough to restore her common sense instantly. Good. She needed that. Renee straightened slightly. Your breakfast is getting cold. Jalen studied her expression carefully now. And annoyingly, he seemed to understand immediately that something shifted. You do that. Every time. Renee frowned. Do what? You pull away the second something feels real. Her breath caught slightly. Real. That word landed too heavily between them. This isn't real, she answered quickly. Jalen went quiet, not angry, just watching her. And somehow that made things worse. Because Renee suddenly realized she cared whether she hurt his feelings. Dangerous, dangerous. She grabbed her bag immediately. I have errands. Before lunch prep. Renee. The softness in his voice nearly stopped her. Nearly. But Renee forced herself to keep moving. Because for the first time since meeting Jalen Ryder, this no longer felt harmless. And that terrified her more than anything else. Renee had no intention of attending the charity ball. Absolutely none. But 2 hours before the event, the team's event coordinator called her sounding completely panicked. Please tell me you haven't left yet. Renee paused while packing ingredients into containers. What happened? Our catering supervisor cancelled last minute, and half the staff handling the very important person floor are inexperienced. The woman exhaled sharply. I just need someone reliable there tonight. Renee closed her eyes briefly. Of course, she should have said no. Instead, she heard herself ask, what time do you need me? By 8 o'clock that evening, Renee was standing inside one of the most extravagant rooftop venues she had ever seen. Soft gold lighting reflected against glass walls overlooking downtown Los Angeles. Music drifted through the ballroom. Professional athletes, celebrities, influencers, and wealthy executives filled the space dressed in designer everything. Renee instantly felt out of place. Not because she looked bad. She didn't. Her black satin dress hugged her figure elegantly without trying too hard. Soft curls framed her face naturally. Minimal jewelry, simple makeup, elegant. But still, this world belonged to younger women with cameras following them around. Women who understood fame, attention, performance. Not women like Renee. She kept her focus on work instead, helping staff organize the VIP tables, secking food placements, avoiding unnecessary attention. Simple, at least until Jalen saw her. Renee noticed the exact moment it happened. 1 second, he was speaking to sponsors near the ballroom entrance. The next, his entire attention shifted directly toward her, and stayed there. Renee looked away immediately. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Marcus appeared beside Jalen holding a drink, following his line of sight before smirking. "Oh," he muttered. "Now I understand why you actually showed up tonight." Jalen ignored him completely, still watching Renee, and somehow that awareness followed her for the rest of the evening. Everywhere she moved, she felt him noticing her, across crowded rooms, across conversations, across the ballroom. Not possessive, just aware, too aware. At one point, Renee reached for champagne glasses near one of the serving stations when Jalen suddenly appeared beside her. "You've avoided me all night." Renee kept arranging glasses carefully. "I'm working." "You've used that excuse for 2 months." Her pulse shifted annoyingly. Renee glanced at him briefly. Dark, tailored suit, chain resting against his collarbone, warm amber light catching against his skin. God, he looked unfairly good tonight, which only irritated her more. "You should be talking to your sponsors," she answered calmly. "I was." His eyes stayed on her. "Then I saw you." That sentence landed far too heavily. Renee looked away immediately. "Professional. Stay professional. You really enjoy making my life difficult, don't you?" A soft laugh escaped him. "You think this difficult now?" That answer made her chest tighten unexpectedly. Before she could respond, another athlete interrupted Jalen loudly from across the ballroom. The moment broke instantly, but somehow the tension stayed with Renee anyway. And by the end of the night, she was already emotionally overwhelmed enough before she ever saw the woman waiting near the elevators. By midnight, Renee was exhausted, emotionally more than physically. The entire evening had felt dangerous in ways she didn't know how to explain. Every glance from Jalen, every moment he somehow found his way beside her, every quiet conversation charged with things neither of them were fully saying aloud. It was becoming too much. And the worst part? Renee was beginning to realize she no longer wanted him to stop. That terrified her. So the second the event finally started winding down, she decided to leave quietly before she did something emotionally reckless. No goodbye, no lingering conversation, no unnecessary tension. Just leave. Renee grabbed her bag from one of the private lounge areas near the elevators and headed toward the hallway leading outside. That was when she saw her, the woman from Jalen's phone earlier that week. Tall, beautiful, young enough to make Renee instantly aware of every year she carried on her body. The woman walked confidently toward Jalen in silver heels, smiling like she already knew he'd pay attention to her. And, unfortunately, he did look up. Renee stopped moving before she could stop herself. Not because she wanted to watch, because suddenly she couldn't look away. The woman laughed softly at something Jalen said, adjusted his tie casually, stepped closer. Too familiar, too comfortable. Something painful tightened slowly inside Renee's chest. Of course. What exactly had she been expecting? Late-night conversations, comfort, attention. That didn't change reality. Men like Jalen Ryder belonged beside women like this. Young, beautiful, easy. Not women carrying divorce trauma and age insecurity beneath elegant dresses. Renee looked down briefly, angry at herself for even caring this much. Then suddenly, the woman grabbed Jalen lightly by his collar and kissed him. Camera flashes exploded almost instantly nearby. Paparazzi. People turned immediately. Phones lifted. Somebody laughed loudly from across the hallway, and Renee felt something inside her collapse quietly. There it was. Reality. Not the kitchen conversations. Not the way he noticed things about her. Not the warmth slowly growing between them. This was his real world. And she had been stupid enough to forget that for a second. Humiliation burned hot beneath Renee's skin immediately, because somehow this hurt more than it should have. They weren't together. Jalen had every right to kiss whoever he wanted. So why did it feel like disappointment physically pressing against her chest? Renee swallowed hard and turned away immediately. She didn't stay long enough to see Jalen pull back, didn't hear him curse under his breath, didn't see the irritation flash across his face afterward. By the time he looked up again, Renee was already gone, and somehow panic hit him instantly. Not because of the cameras, not because of the headlines tomorrow, because Renee Lawson had seen it, and for the first time all night, that was the only thing Jalen cared about. Renee barely remembered the drive home. By the time she entered her house, her chest still felt painfully tight. Humiliating. That was the only word stuck in her head now. Humiliating that she cared. Humiliating that she felt jealous. Humiliating that, for one reckless moment tonight, she had almost forgotten who Jalen Ryder really was. Young, wanted, surrounded by women like that, constantly. Not her. Renee kicked off her heels near the doorway and walked straight into the kitchen, gripping the counter hard enough to steady herself. God, what was she even doing? A loud knock interrupted her thoughts suddenly. Her stomach dropped immediately. No. Another knock. Then Jalen's voice through the door. Renee. Her pulse turned chaotic instantly. She should ignore him. Absolutely ignore him. Instead, somehow, her feet carried her to the door anyway. The second she opened it, Jalen stepped inside looking frustrated and breathless, like he'd rushed the entire way there. You left? Renee laughed once. A small broken sound. Obviously. Jalen frowned immediately. That's not funny. No, she answered quietly. What's funny is me forgetting for 1 second what this actually is. His jaw tightened slightly. What does that mean? Renee looked away instantly, because suddenly everything she'd been suppressing for weeks felt too close to the surface. That woman kissed you in front of cameras, Jalen. I pushed her off. Well, I didn't stay long enough to see that part. Silence. Heavy silence. Jalen stepped closer slowly. Renee, no. She backed away immediately. No, because this is exactly why I kept trying to create distance. Her voice cracked slightly despite herself. And God, she hated that. I'm too grown to be standing around feeling stupid over a 24-year-old athlete. Jalen's expression shifted instantly. Not amusement, not ego, hurt. You think that's what this is? What else could it possibly be? Renee snapped softly. Women like her make sense beside you. I don't. That's bullshit. The sharpness in his voice startled her slightly. Renee crossed her arms tightly. You don't understand what people will say. I don't care. Well, I do. Her voice rose emotionally for the first time. Because I already lived through being replaced by someone younger once. That finally silenced him. The room suddenly felt too quiet, too raw. Renee looked away quickly, breathing unevenly now. I can't survive feeling foolish like that again. The confession came out smaller than she intended, more vulnerable. And somehow, that affected Jalen more than her anger had. He stared at her for a long moment before speaking again, softly this time. Renee. Her name sounded different in his voice tonight. Lower, closer, dangerously intimate. You really think I chased you around for months because you were convenient? Her breath caught slightly. Jalen stepped closer again. This time, she didn't move away. You think I sit in kitchens for hours because I'm bored? His eyes stayed locked on hers. You think I notice every little thing about you because I'm curious for fun? The tension between them became unbearable suddenly. Renee could barely breathe around it now. And somehow, Jalen noticed that too. His hand lifted slowly toward her face, gentle, like he was giving her time to stop him. But Renee didn't. His fingers brushed softly along her jaw, warm. And God, that tiny touch alone nearly unraveled her completely. Jalen! Her voice barely existed anymore. His eyes dropped briefly to her mouth, then back up again. Tell me to leave. Silence. Renee should have. She knew she should have. Instead, she whispered, I don't think I want you to. And that was all it took. Jalen kissed her like he'd been holding himself back for months. Deep, emotional, controlled for barely 2 seconds before the restraint disappeared completely. Renee gasped softly against his mouth as his hands pulled her closer instantly. And suddenly, every week of tension, every late-night conversation, every lingering look, every dangerous almost moment, finally exploded. Her fingers gripped his shirt tightly as he kissed her again, slower this time, like he wanted to memorize her reaction. God, nobody had kissed her like this in years. Like they wanted her. Not temporarily. Not casually. Wanted. Jalen's forehead rested briefly against hers as both of them breathed unevenly. You have no idea what you do to me, he muttered softly. The way he said it, that almost destroyed her more than the kiss itself. And when he kissed her again, Renee stopped thinking altogether. The second kiss felt different, less restrained, more dangerous. Jalen backed Renee slowly against the kitchen counter without breaking the kiss once, his hands sliding carefully along her waist, like he'd been imagining touching her for far too long. And, honestly, maybe he had. Renee's breath shook softly when his mouth moved against hers again, slower this time, deeper. God, this was a mistake. A massive mistake. So why did it feel so good? Her fingers curled tightly into the front of his shirt as Jalen kissed her like he wanted every thought in her head to disappear. And slowly they did. The insecurity, the overthinking, the fear, all of it blurred every time he touched her. "You still thinking?" he murmured softly against her mouth. Renee let out the smallest breath of laughter. "You talk too much." His hand slid slowly along her thigh, pulling her closer between him and the counter. "And you pretend too much." The heat in his voice sent a shiver through her instantly. Jalen noticed that too. Of course he did. His forehead rested briefly against hers before he kissed her jaw slowly, then the sensitive spot beneath her ear. And oh God! Renee's eyes closed immediately. It had been years since someone touched her like they were paying attention. Years since somebody made her feel desired instead of merely familiar. Jalen's hands moved carefully over her body like he was learning her. Not rushing, not careless. Intentional. That somehow made everything worse. Or better. Renee couldn't even tell anymore. Jalen. His name left her lips softer this time. Needier. And the way his body reacted to hearing it, that almost unraveled her completely. He kissed her again instantly, one hand gripping her waist, while the other tangled gently into her curls. The tension between them had been building for months. Now it finally had somewhere to go, and neither of them seemed capable of stopping anymore. By the time Jalen lifted her effortlessly onto the counter, Renee was breathing hard enough to embarrass herself. But honestly, she no longer cared. Not when he was looking at her like that. Like she was the only woman in the world capable of undoing him. The kiss deepened again. Hotter, now, hungrier, yet somehow still emotional. That was the dangerous part. This didn't feel casual. It felt like surrender. Renee's hand slid beneath his jacket slowly, feeling the warmth of his body beneath her fingertips. Jalen exhaled sharply against her mouth at the touch. That reaction alone nearly destroyed her self-control. "See what you do to me," he muttered roughly. God, the way he said things, the way he looked at her, the way this man somehow made her feel beautiful and wanted at the exact same time. It overwhelmed her completely. And when he carried her toward the bedroom afterward, Renee knew nothing about her life would feel simple again after tonight. Because this wasn't curiosity anymore. Not for either of them. Renee woke slowly to warmth. Heavy warmth. For one quiet second, she forgot where she was. Then reality returned all at once. The dim bedroom, the tangled sheets, the strong arm wrapped securely around her waist. Jalen. Oh God. Renee closed her eyes briefly. Last night came back in flashes, his mouth on hers, his hands gripping her waist, the way he looked at her like he couldn't get enough. And honestly, that part terrified her most, because it hadn't felt temporary. It felt intimate, dangerously intimate. Jalen shifted slightly behind her, pulling her closer unconsciously in his sleep. The movement sent heat rushing instantly through Renee's body. This man was trouble, real trouble. She carefully tried slipping out of his arms without waking him. Unfortunately, Jalen's voice appeared rough and sleepy behind her almost immediately. "You always run after emotional moments." Renee froze. Wonderful. She turned slowly. Jalen looked unfairly attractive first thing in the morning. Sleep-heavy eyes, bare, chest, messy curls against the pillow. And somehow, he was already watching her. Again. "I wasn't running," Renee answered softly. That quiet disbelief again. Renee grabbed the edge of the sheet quickly around herself. "We should probably talk about this." Jalen groaned dramatically and dropped his head back against the pillow. That sentence has never led to happiness in human history. Despite herself, Renee laughed softly, and the second she did, Jalen looked at her differently, warmer, like hearing her laugh mattered to him more than it should. That awareness made Renee's chest tighten unexpectedly. Dangerous. Everything about this was dangerous now. "You regret it?" The question came quieter this time, more serious. Renee looked at him carefully, because the truthful answer was complicated. She regretted how much she wanted him, how easily he affected her, how quickly her carefully rebuilt emotional walls collapsed around him. But last night itself, no, that was the terrifying part. "No," she admitted honestly. Something relaxed visibly in Jalen's expression, and somehow that affected her too much. He reached for her waist gently, pulling her back toward him before she could overthink herself into leaving again. "Good," he murmured softly against her shoulder. The intimacy of that simple word nearly unraveled her again. Renee turned slightly toward him. "This changes things. I know. You sound very calm about that." Jalen's fingers brushed slowly along her waist beneath the sheet. "Because I've wanted this for a while." God, the honesty in his voice. No games. No performance. No hesitation. Renee looked away briefly. "That's exactly what scares me." Jalen studied her quietly for a second. Then, softer. "You still think this is temporary?" Renee didn't answer. Because, yes, part of her still did. Not because she doubted what happened last night. Because life had already taught her that women like her didn't usually get endings like this. Especially not with men like him. Jalen noticed the hesitation immediately. Of course he did. His hand lifted gently beneath her chin until she looked at him again. "You know what your problem is?" Renee exhaled softly. "I'm sure you're about to tell me. You keep acting like being wanted by me is impossible." The intensity in his voice made her pulse shift instantly. "And you keep saying things like that because they're true." Silence. Heavy silence. Then, suddenly, Jalen kissed her again. Slow this time. Sleepy. Dangerously affectionate. And somehow, that kiss felt even more intimate than the ones from last night. Because this one didn't feel driven by tension. It felt natural, like he'd already gotten used to having her close. And honestly, that realization scared Renee more than anything else so far. Before we continue, I need you to answer this honestly in the comments. Do you think Renee should walk away now before things get even more complicated? Or should she finally allow herself to experience the kind of love and desire she thought she lost forever? Because after one night with Jalen Ryder, pretending this was just curiosity is becoming impossible for both of them. And trust me, the world around them is about to make things much harder. The problem started 3 days later, not because of headlines, not because of gossip, because suddenly Jalen stopped hiding how much he wanted her around. And Renee didn't know what to do with that. "You're staring again." Jalen barely looked up from the kitchen island. "You wear that dress often." Renee glanced down at herself. Simple, fitted, brown dress. Nothing dramatic. It's a dress. It's distracting. Her pulse shifted instantly. He said things too casually, like he didn't understand what they did to her. Or maybe worse, maybe he understood perfectly. Renee continued plating lunch, while trying very hard not to think about the fact that Jalen had barely let her sleep the previous night, or the night before that. Every time she tried creating distance again, he somehow ruined it with touches, looks, that deep, quiet voice against her skin late at night. And, honestly, the intimacy was becoming addictive. That terrified her, because this no longer felt physical. It felt emotional, dangerously emotional. "You're thinking too hard again." Renee sighed softly. "You noticing that is getting annoying." A slow grin spread across Jalen's face. "You like that, I notice." She looked up immediately. Cocky. Entirely too cocky. Unfortunately, he wasn't completely wrong. That was the problem. The kitchen suddenly felt warmer when he stood and walked toward her slowly. Not rushed. Never rushed. Jalen stopped directly in front of her, eyes dragging slowly across her face, like he was trying to memorize every expression she made. It still affected her, every single time. "How do you do that?" Renee asked quietly. "Do what?" "Look at me like that." Jalen's expression softened slightly. "Like what?" Like she was beautiful, like she mattered, like he wanted her constantly. Renee couldn't say any of that aloud. Instead, she whispered, "You know." Something changed in his eyes instantly. The tension between them thickened so fast, it stole the air from the room. Jalen's hand slid slowly against her waist, pulling her gently against him. And, God, Renee still wasn't used to how easily this man affected her body. "You still nervous around me?" he murmured softly. "Yes." Honest answer. Jalen smiled faintly at that, before lowering his mouth against her neck slowly. Renee's fingers immediately gripped his shirt tighter. The kiss beneath her ear made her knees weaken embarrassingly fast. "Jalen, you're distracting." "That's the point." His mouth moved against her skin again, slower this time, deliberate enough to make her breathing uneven instantly. And honestly, the way this younger man touched her felt unfair. Patient, attentive, like her reactions fascinated him. Nobody had paid attention to her body this carefully in years. Jalen pulled back just enough to look at her again, and the expression on his face nearly destroyed what little composure she had left. Hungry, but worse. Emotional, like wanting her actually meant something to him. That was the dangerous part, not the attraction, the feeling behind it. Renee should have gone home hours ago. That thought repeated in her head continuously as Jalen kissed her against the kitchen counter again. Slow, deep, completely distracting. And somehow, every kiss between them kept getting more intimate instead of less dangerous. Jalen's hand rested firmly against her waist while his mouth moved lazily against hers like he had absolutely nowhere else to be. Meanwhile, Renee could barely think straight anymore. "You're doing that thing again," he murmured softly. Renee blinked slightly. "What thing?" "Thinking." She laughed breathlessly against his mouth. "Well, somebody has to." Jalen smiled faintly before kissing her again, harder this time, pulling a soft gasp from her instantly. This man was becoming a serious problem. His hands slid slowly along her body with dangerous familiarity now, like he'd already learned exactly what reactions made her lose composure fastest. And unfortunately, he had. Renee's fingers tangled lightly into the curls at the back of his neck as his mouth moved down her jaw slowly. Patient, too patient, like he genuinely enjoyed unraveling her. "Jalen, we cannot keep doing this in the kitchen." That finally made him laugh softly against her skin. "You're the one who keeps stopping here." Renee opened her mouth to argue, then immediately lost the thought when his hands gripped her hips tighter. Completely unfair. The tension between them had changed after that first night together. Before, it felt restrained. Now, it felt inevitable. Like the second they were alone too long, they gravitated toward each other automatically. And, honestly, that scared Renee more every day. Because she was becoming emotionally attached now. Not just physically, emotionally. That realization hit hardest later that evening after they finally moved to the living room. Rain tapped softly against the massive windows, while Jalen stretched across the couch beside her, watching old game footage half-heartedly. Or pretending to, because every few minutes his attention drifted back to her instead. "You know you stare a lot." Jalen looked entirely unashamed. "You know you're beautiful, right?" Renee's breath caught immediately. There it was again, that dangerous honesty. No hesitation, no performance, no games, just truth. And somehow, that affected her more than smooth lines ever could. Renee looked down briefly. "You say things too easily." "No," Jalen answered quietly. "I just say them out loud." The room suddenly felt too intimate again, too warm, especially when his fingers brushed slowly against hers on the couch. Then intertwined, naturally, like they'd been doing it forever. Renee stared at their hands for a second, longer than she should have, and something about that simple touch almost overwhelmed her emotionally. Because this right here, felt more dangerous than the physical intimacy. Comfort, the ease between them, the softness, the way Jalen looked happiest, simply having her near him. It felt real, and real things could hurt. "You're leaving again, aren't you?" Renee looked over, slowly. Jalen was already watching her carefully. Too carefully. "I have work tomorrow." "So do I." Silence. Then softly, "Stay tonight." The way he said that. Quiet, hopeful, like he actually wanted her there, beyond physical reasons. Renee's chest tightened painfully, because she wanted to stay more than she should. And that truth alone changed everything. Renee stayed. And honestly, that decision alone terrified her more than sleeping with him ever had. Because staying meant comfort, routine, morning after morning, beside the same man. It meant this was becoming real. By midnight, the rain outside had intensified, soft thunder rolling across the city, while the penthouse lights dimmed low around them. Jalen stood near the bedroom window removing his watch slowly, while Renee sat quietly at the edge of the bed watching him. And God, this still didn't feel real sometimes. A 24-year-old NBA star looking at her like this, touching her like this, wanting her like this. Jalen glanced over his shoulder slightly. You thinking again? Renee smiled softly, despite herself. You notice everything? I notice you. That answer hit too deeply, especially when he walked toward her afterward with that same calm confidence that somehow always made her pulse betray her instantly. Jalen stopped between her knees slowly, his hands sliding gently along her thighs beneath the silk fabric of her dress. The intimacy of that simple touch alone made Renee inhale sharply, and the way his eyes darkened at her reaction. God, you know what I like most about you? He murmured softly. Renee's fingers curled lightly around his wrist. What? You feel everything? The room suddenly felt hotter, closer. Jalen's hands moved slowly up her waist before he kissed her again, deep enough to pull the breath from her lungs instantly. Renee melted against him embarrassingly fast now, like her body already knew him, trusted him, wanted him. That realization alone almost overwhelmed her emotionally, because it had been years since touch felt this intimate instead of routine. Jalen kissed her like he was addicted to learning her reactions. Every breath, every sound, every shiver. Patient, intentional, and honestly, that patience made everything more intense. Renee's hands slid beneath his shirt slowly, feeling the hard warmth of his body beneath her fingertips as his mouth traveled along her neck again. The soft sound that escaped her made Jalen pause briefly, then smile against her skin. You like when I kiss you there? Renee covered her face instantly. Oh my God. His laugh was low and warm. You're cute when you get embarrassed. I am not embarrassed. Completely unconvinced. Jalen lifted her effortlessly into his arms a second later, and Renee instinctively wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her toward the bed again. The movement sent heat rushing through both of them instantly, and judging from the rough sound that left his throat, Jalen felt it too. The kiss deepened again once he laid her back against the sheets. Slower this time, more intimate, less urgency, more emotion. And somehow that made it worse, because now every touch between them felt meaningful. Renee looked up at him breathlessly as his fingers brushed carefully along her face, and the expression in his eyes almost scared her. Not lust. Something deeper. Something softer. You keep looking at me like that, she whispered unevenly. Like what? Like I matter too much already. Jalen stared at her for a second, then answered quietly, Maybe you do. Oh, that almost broke her, because suddenly Renee realized the truly dangerous part of all this wasn't the attraction anymore. It was how easy this man was becoming to love. The headlines started 4 days later. Renee saw them accidentally, which somehow made it worse. She had stopped at a grocery store that morning before heading to the penthouse when 2 college girls near the magazine aisle suddenly gasped loudly. Oh my God, that's her. Renee froze instantly. Her stomach dropped before she even understood why. One of the girls quickly tilted her phone toward the other, And there it was, a blurry photo from the gala. Jalen standing close to Renee on the terrace beneath city lights, his attention completely fixed on her. The headline underneath read, NBA star Jalen Ryder spotted getting close to mystery older woman. Renee's chest tightened painfully. Older woman. The second girl frowned slightly. She's pretty, though. Yeah, but she's definitely older than him. Renee walked out of the store immediately. By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking. This was exactly what she feared. Not because the article itself was terrible, because she knew how the internet worked. Cruel, relentless, obsessed with humiliation. And, unfortunately, things escalated fast. By afternoon, sports blogs reposted the photo. Social media pages zoomed into Renee's face. People debated her age in comment sections like she wasn't a human being. Gold digger, midlife crisis, desperate older woman. Renee made the mistake of reading comments exactly once, never again. By evening, she was emotionally exhausted before she even arrived at the penthouse. And, unfortunately, the second Jalen opened the door, he knew something was wrong. You saw it. Renee placed her bag down quietly. It's everywhere. Jalen's jaw tightened instantly. I'm handling it. How exactly do you handle millions of strangers discussing your age gap? Silence. Heavy silence. Renee walked toward the kitchen quickly before her emotions embarrassed her further. But Jalen followed immediately. Renee, no. Because this is real now. She laughed once bitterly. This is exactly what I tried to avoid. You think I care about some blogs? It's easy for you not to care. That made him stop. Renee turned toward him. Finally. You're still the young superstar everybody wants after this. I'm the woman. People are mocking. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. And God. She hated that. Jalen's expression changed instantly. All softness disappeared. He walked toward her slowly until he stood directly in front of her. Then, quietly, you think I'm gonna sit back while people disrespect you? Renee looked away immediately. Jalen. No. His hand lifted gently beneath her chin until she looked at him again. The intensity in his eyes almost stole her breath. They don't get to make you feel ashamed for being wanted. The room went completely silent because somehow that sentence reached every insecurity she had been carrying for years. Older, replaced, invisible. And suddenly, this younger man was standing here, looking at her like none of those things mattered at all. Renee's eyes burned unexpectedly. You make this sound simple. Jalen's thumb brushed softly beneath her eye. That's because loving you is simple. Oh, that almost destroyed her completely. And the worst part? He meant it. Renee tried pretending the headlines didn't affect her. She failed badly. By the next morning, the story had spread everywhere. Sports pages, entertainment blogs, social media, breakdown videos. People dissected her appearance like it was public property. She looks good for her age. He definitely has mommy issues. She probably trapped him emotionally. She's old enough to mentor him. Every comment felt like another tiny cut beneath her skin. And somehow, the cruelty hurt more because part of Renee already feared those things privately. By noon, she had stopped checking her phone entirely. Unfortunately, that didn't stop the world from reaching her. Even the grocery cashier recognized her. "Oh," the woman said awkwardly while scanning vegetables. "You're the lady dating that basketball player." Dating. The word made Renee's chest tighten instantly. Because technically, they still hadn't even defined what this was. And yet somehow the entire internet already had opinions about it. By the time she arrived at the penthouse later that evening, she was emotionally exhausted. The second she stepped inside, Jalen noticed. "Of course he did. You haven't answered my texts all day." Renee placed her purse down quietly. "I needed space." Jalen's expression tightened immediately. "From me? No," she exhaled shakily. "From all of this." Silence. Then, softly, "Come here." Renee should have resisted. Instead, her body moved toward him, automatically now. Dangerous habit. Jalen pulled her gently between his legs where he sat at the edge of the couch, his hands settling against her waist naturally, like they belonged there. And, honestly, that simple touch almost made her emotional immediately, because suddenly she realized this was becoming the only place she felt safe lately. Against him. Jalen looked up at her carefully. "You read the comments." Not a question. Renee looked away. That was stupid. His jaw tightened. People online say ugly things about everybody. Not like this. Jalen's hands gripped her waist slightly firmer. "Look at me." She hesitated briefly, then did. Big mistake. Because the second their eyes met, Renee felt tears threatening embarrassingly fast. "I hate this," she whispered. Jalen's expression softened instantly. The attention, the comments, the way they keep saying, "I should know better, because I'm older." Her laugh broke unevenly, like wanting somebody younger automatically makes me pathetic. Jalen stared at her for a long moment, then slowly stood, now towering over her completely. And somehow, the intensity in his eyes made the room feel smaller instantly. "You know what I think?" he asked quietly. Renee swallowed softly. "What?" "I think people get uncomfortable when women stop acting ashamed of wanting things." The words wrapped around her chest painfully, because maybe that was true. Maybe society forgave older men for desire far easier than women. Jalen's hand brushed slowly along her jaw. "And I think you spent so long convincing yourself you're too old to be wanted like this." His thumb rested softly against her bottom lip. "That you don't know what to do with somebody who wants you openly." God. The way he looked at her while saying things like that, it overwhelmed her every single time. Renee's breathing turned uneven when Jalen kissed her slowly again. Not rushed, not desperate, intentional, like he was trying to erase every cruel thing she'd read today, one touch at a time. His mouth moved against hers deeper after a second, his hand sliding into her curls carefully. And suddenly, the tension from the entire day melted into something hotter, needier. Renee's fingers gripped his shirt tightly as Jalen backed her slowly against the wall without breaking the kiss. The movement pulled a soft sound from her instantly. Jalen reacted immediately to it. Of course he did. "You know what I hate," he murmured against her mouth. Renee could barely think straight anymore. "What?" "The fact that strangers got in your head enough to make you forget how beautiful you are." Oh God. The sincerity in his voice almost hurt, because he wasn't trying to seduce her anymore. He was trying to reassure her. And somehow, that felt even more intimate. Things got worse fast. By the end of the week, Renee's face was everywhere online. Someone leaked another photo of her entering Jalen's penthouse late at night. That was all it took. Now the internet acted like they were some forbidden celebrity couple. Sports podcasts joked about her age. Women online insulted her appearance. Men called Jalen confused. And unfortunately, people around Jalen started noticing the pressure too. You need to relax until this dies down, his manager warned during a meeting Renee accidentally overheard. No more public appearances with her. Her. Not even Renee anymore. Just her. Renee quietly walked away before Jalen saw her standing there. But the words stayed in her chest the entire day. By evening, Gala finally called, sounding upset. Mama, why didn't you tell me? Renee closed her eyes briefly. Ah, so she saw everything too. It's complicated. You're sleeping with him? Direct. Very Gala. Renee rubbed her forehead tiredly. Yes. Silence. Then. He's younger than some of my professors. Renee laughed, despite herself. Thank you, Gala. Very supportive. I'm serious. Her daughter sighed heavily. Mama, are you happy? The question caught Renee off guard instantly. Happy? God. She hadn't thought about happiness in years. Only survival, healing, getting through things quietly. And somehow, Jalen had disrupted all of that. Yes, she admitted softly. Too happy, actually. That answer changed Gala's tone immediately. Oh, silence lingered for a second. Then, quietly, he really likes you, doesn't he? Renee looked toward the balcony where Jalen stood outside on the phone, arguing with somebody. Probably management. Probably because of her. Yes, she whispered. That's the problem. Later that night, Renee finally walked onto the balcony slowly. Jalen looked exhausted, frustrated. The second he saw her, his expression softened immediately. That alone almost broke her heart. You heard? He nodded once. They want me to distance myself publicly for a while. Renee looked down briefly. Of course they did. They're right. Jalen frowned instantly. No, Jalen, I'm not hiding you. The firmness in his voice startled her slightly. Renee crossed her arms tightly against the cold air. You say that now because everything still feels exciting. His jaw tightened immediately. You really think this is temporary for me? You're 24, and you keep saying that like it explains everything. Renee looked away quickly, because deep down, she still couldn't fully understand why somebody like him wanted somebody like her this intensely. I don't want your career damaged because of me. Jalen stepped closer immediately. My career is fine. The internet is tearing me apart. That's because people are miserable. Renee laughed bitterly. No, Jalen. It's because they think I should know better than to let someone your age touch me. Silence. Then, suddenly, Jalen grabbed her hand firmly. Look at me. She did. Big mistake. Because the emotion in his eyes hit too hard. I'm tired of you talking about yourself, like loving you is something shameful. Oh, that landed directly in her chest. Jalen stepped even closer now, lowering his voice. I don't care what those people think. I don't care about the age gap. And I definitely don't care that you're older. His hand tightened gently around hers. I care that every time things get hard, your first instinct is to push me away. Renee's eyes burned instantly, because, unfortunately, he was right. And somehow, that made this even more terrifying, especially when she realized she was already in love with him too. Chapter 7. Breakdown and Choice. Part 1. Maybe I should go. Renee ended things 3 days later, or at least she tried to. The pressure had become unbearable. Everywhere she went, people stared, commented, whispered. Even worse, Jalen's team was clearly frustrated now. Sponsors asked questions. Reporters kept bringing her up after games. And every headline somehow painted Renee like she was ruining his future. She couldn't take it anymore. So that night, while Jalen showered after practice, Renee quietly packed the small overnight bag she kept at the penthouse. No drama. No screaming. Just leave before she destroyed something good. Again. You leaving? Renee froze instantly. Jalen stood shirtless near the bedroom doorway, hair damp, exhaustion written across his face. And somehow, seeing her bag hurt him immediately. Renee looked away. Maybe this was a mistake. Silence. Then, you don't mean that. I do. No, Jalen answered quietly. You mean you're scared. Renee zipped the bag quickly before he could see her hands shaking. I'm realistic. You're running. That's not fair. Jalen laughed, once bitterly. Fair? He stepped closer. You know what's not fair? Falling in love with somebody who keeps acting like loving her back is ruining my life. The room went completely still. Renee's breath caught instantly. Love. Oh God. Neither of them had said it before now, and somehow hearing it aloud made everything feel even more real. Jalen looked at her like he regretted nothing. Not one word. I love you, he said again, quieter this time. And you're standing here trying to leave because strangers online hurt your feelings. Tears burned Renee's eyes immediately. It's not just the internet. Then what is it? Renee finally snapped emotionally. It's the fact that eventually you're going to wake up and realize I'm too old for you. The words exploded out of her before she could stop them. Years of insecurity, humiliation, fear, all of it finally surfaced at once. Jalen stared at her silently, then walked closer, slowly, until he stood directly in front of her. You really believe that? Renee looked away immediately, because, yes, part of her always would. Jalen's voice dropped softer now. Renee, I have never looked at another woman the way I look at you. That almost broke her completely. His hand slid gently against her face. You make me feel calm. You make me feel wanted for who I am. You make me happy. His forehead rested lightly against hers. And I'm tired of you acting like that means nothing because of a number. Renee's breathing turned uneven instantly. God. The sincerity in his voice. The emotion. The way this younger man loved her without hesitation while she kept trying to protect herself from being hurt. Jalen kissed her slowly then. Not desperate this time. Emotional. Painfully emotional. And somehow that made it impossible for Renee to hold herself together anymore. Because for the first time in years, someone was choosing her completely. The next morning, Derek Lawson called. Renee stared at her phone in disbelief before answering. What? Straight to the point. Derek sighed softly. So, that's how we answer phones now. Derek, I saw the articles. Of course he did. The entire world had. Renee walked slowly into the kitchen while Jalen slept upstairs. And I think this whole thing is getting out of hand. Renee laughed quietly. Actually laughed. Because suddenly the hypocrisy felt unbelievable. You left me for a 23-year-old influencer. That's different. The anger that rose inside her was instant. No, Renee answered sharply. What's different is that nobody humiliated you for it. Silence. Derek exhaled heavily. Renee, you're making yourself look ridiculous. That sentence hit harder than it should have. Old wounds always did. Renee walked slowly into the kitchen while Derek continued talking. This relationship is making you look ridiculous, Renee. The words landed hard enough that she went silent for a second. Unfortunately, that was the exact moment Jalen walked downstairs, barefoot, half awake, gray sweatpants hanging low on his hips. His eyes immediately moved to Renee's expression. Tense, hurt, guarded. Jalen frowned slightly. Everything okay? Renee exhaled sharply and pulled the phone away from her ear for a second. It's Derek. Something dark flickered briefly across Jalen's face. Then Derek's voice carried loudly enough through the phone. She's almost 40, for God's sake. Oh. Jalen walked closer immediately. And when Renee looked up at him, she already knew from his expression this conversation was about to get worse. Is that him? Derek asked sharply through the phone. Jalen held his hand out calmly. Give me the phone. Derek's voice sharpened immediately through the speaker. Is that him? Jalen walked directly toward Renee without hesitation. Yes, he answered calmly. And you sound real comfortable disrespecting her for somebody who cheated first. Oh, Renee blinked, because apparently Jalen woke up ready to fight today. Derek's tone darkened instantly. You think this relationship is gonna last? Jalen looked directly at Renee while answering. Yes. No hesitation. None. And somehow, that certainty still affected her every single time. Derek scoffed quietly. She's almost 40. Jalen's jaw tightened immediately. And she's still the best woman in every room. She walks into silence. Complete silence. Because, honestly, nobody had defended Renee like that in years. Not publicly, not confidently, not without shame. Derek finally laughed bitterly. You'll get bored eventually. Jalen looked at Renee once more before answering softly. Then I guess I'll spend the rest of my life proving you wrong. Oh God, that almost destroyed her emotionally. Because the way he said it, he meant every word. Derek eventually hung up after that, but the silence afterward felt heavy in a completely different way now. Renee looked down briefly, overwhelmed. "You didn't have to do that." Jalen frowned slightly. "Yes, I did. You shouldn't fight everybody. Because of me." Jalen stepped closer slowly. "Renee, I would rather fight the entire world than watch you keep apologizing for being loved." The room went quiet again. And suddenly, Renee realized something important. The internet still talked. People still judged. The headlines still existed. But none of that felt stronger than this man standing in front of her, loving her openly without fear. And maybe, for the first time in a very long time, Renee Lawson was finally ready to stop being afraid too. Before we get to the final chapter, I need you in the comments. Do you think relationships with large age gaps can truly last long term? Or do you think society is right to question them? Because Jalen Ryder is about to make a choice that changes both of their lives forever. The championship game should have been the only thing people talked about that night. Instead, half the internet seemed more interested in whether Renee Lawson would show up. Sports blogs tracked her car entering the arena. Pages analyzed her outfit before she even reached her seat. Comment sections exploded instantly. "Too old for him. She's embarrassing. He'll leave her eventually." Renee stopped reading after the first few minutes. She sat quietly inside the private suite, wearing a simple black dress, trying very hard not to let thousands of strangers ruin what should have been one of Jalen's biggest nights. Down below, the arena roared with noise. Lights, cameras, fame. And somehow, Renee still felt out of place inside his world sometimes. The game itself was unbelievable. Jalen dominated from the first quarter, focused, aggressive, locked in. But what unsettled Renee most? Every single time cameras caught him during breaks, his eyes searched for her first, like he needed to know she was still there. By the fourth quarter, the Los Angeles Blaze won the championship. The arena exploded instantly. Fans screaming, confetti falling, reporters rushing the court. Renee smiled despite herself as teammates tackled Jalen, laughing near center court. God, he looked happy, really happy. For one quiet second, she considered slipping out before media attention became unbearable again. But before she could stand, the massive arena screen suddenly flashed toward the private suites, straight toward her. The crowd reacted instantly, some cheering, some shouting, phones lifting everywhere. "Oh no!" Renee froze. Then, suddenly, down on the court, Jalen looked up directly at her, and instead of ignoring it, instead of pretending not to know her, the 24-year-old NBA superstar smiled, then held his hand out toward her, openly in front of the entire arena. The crowd lost their minds instantly. Renee's heart slammed painfully against her chest, because this was the moment everybody expected him to pull away, hide her, protect his image. Instead, Jalen Ryder was asking her to walk directly into the spotlight beside him, openly, proudly. And somehow, that terrified Renee less than it used to. Slowly, she stood. The arena noise grew louder immediately as cameras followed her the entire way down. Every step felt unreal. But the second Renee finally reached the court, Jalen walked straight toward her without hesitation. No embarrassment, No uncertainty. No shame. Just certainty. His hands slid firmly around her waist as thousands of cameras flashed around them. And then he kissed her, right there, in front of everybody, deep enough to silence every insecurity Renee had carried for years. The crowd erupted instantly, but honestly, Renee barely heard any of it anymore, because suddenly nothing mattered, except the way this man looked at her afterward. Like choosing her publicly was the easiest decision he'd ever made. A reporter shouted loudly from nearby, "Jalen, what do you say to people criticizing your relationship?" Jalen never looked away from Renee when he answered, "I think people should stop acting like women expire after 30. The arena exploded again. Then softer, more personal this time, he added, "And for the record?" His thumb brushed gently against Renee's cheek. "That's my woman." Oh, God. Renee laughed through sudden tears before hiding her face briefly against his chest while cameras captured everything. And somewhere in the middle of all the noise, all the judgment, all the opinions, Renee Lawson finally stopped apologizing for being loved exactly the way she deserved. Sometimes love doesn't arrive how people expect. Sometimes it comes later, messier, more complicated. And sometimes the right person loves you loudly enough to silence every insecurity somebody else once planted inside you. If you enjoyed this story, do not forget to like, comment, and most definitely subscribe to Miss Wink Stories.